In the early 1800s, the entire area of the Middle East was in a state of political, economic, and social decline. A few people lived in luxury, while many suffered through poverty, disease, and ignorance. The religious affairs were in a state of hopeless decadence. Education and justice were neglected. Such was the state of affairs when the Bab's mission was to prepare humanity for the event of the coming of that universal messenger of God, he whom God shall make manifest. The title Bahá'u'lláh, meaning the glory of God, was mentioned by the Bab.
Baha'u'lláh, whose given name was Mirza Hossein Ali, was born and brought up in Tehran into one of the leading noble families of Iran on November 12, 1817. His infancy was a cause of astonishment to his parents, who had come to realize that amongst their children this son was distinguished. Baha'u'lláh always spent part of the year, mostly in summer, in Takur, in the district of Nur at his ancestral palatial home. Baha'u'llah's father, Mirza Bozorg, in his own masterly calligraphic hand wrote the following lines in a prominent place in that mansion.
When thou reachest the threshold of the beloved, say A, for there neither salam nor alaik can find a way. This is the veil of love. Hold thy steps. This is holy ground. Shed thy footgear. To this day, those lines written by Mirza Bozorg have endured. From childhood, he was extremely kind and generous. He was a great lover of outdoor life, most of his time being spent in the garden or in the fields. He had an extraordinary power of attraction which was felt by all. People always crowded around him. Ministers and people of the court would surround him, and the children also were devoted to him. When he was only 13 or 14 years old, he became renowned for his learning. He would converse on any subject and solve any problem presented to him. In large gatherings, he would discuss matters with the ulama and would explain intricate religious questions. All of them used to listen to him with the greatest interest.
When Baha'u'lláh was 22 years old, his father died, and the government wished him to succeed to his father's position in the ministry, as was customary in Persia. But Baha'u'lláh did not accept the offer. Then the Prime Minister said, "Leave him to himself. Such a position is unworthy of him. He has some higher aim in view. I cannot understand him, but I am convinced that he is destined for some lofty career." Baha'u'llah's visits to Nur had produced the most far-reaching results and won the hearts of the people. The effect of his words and deeds revealed his glory to the countrymen in Nur. All things seemed to be endowed with a new and more abundant life. All things seemed to be proclaimed aloud, "Behold, the beauty of God has been made manifest. Arise, for he has come in all his glory."
The district of Nur, literally meaning light, which lay embedded within the mountains of Mazandaran, was the first to catch the rays of the sun that had arisen in Shiraz, the first to proclaim to the rest of Persia that the day star of heavenly guidance had at last arisen to illuminate the whole world. When the Bab declared his mission in 1844, Baha'u'lláh, who was then in his 27th year, boldly embraced the Babi faith, of which he soon became recognized as one of the most powerful and fearless exponents. For 9 years, from 1844 to 1853, Persians of all classes had been caught up in a storm of hope and excitement aroused by the Bab's announcement of the coming of that universal messenger of God, he whom God shall make manifest. Even though Baha'u'lláh never met the Bab, he was in constant correspondence with him and gave wholehearted support to the spread of the Bab's teachings. In defense of the Bab's cause, Baha'u'lláh was twice imprisoned. He was arrested and brought in chains and on foot to Tehran, where he was cast into a notorious siyahchal, the Black Pit, a deep, vermin-infested dungeon which had been created in one of the city's abundant reservoirs.
We were consigned for 4 months to a place foul beyond comparison. The dungeon was wrapped in thick darkness, and our fellow prisoners numbered nearly 150 souls, thieves, assassins, and highwaymen. Though crowded, it had no other outlet than the passage by which we entered. No pen can depict that place, nor any tongue describe its loathsome smell. Most of these men had neither clothes nor bedding to lie on. God alone knoweth what befell us in that most foul-smelling and gloomy place. Each day the guards would descend the 3 steep flights of stairs of the pit, seize one or more of the prisoners, and drag them out to be executed. In the streets of Tehran, Western observers were appalled by scenes of Babi victims blown from cannon mouths, hacked to death by axes and swords, and tortured with burning candles inserted into open wounds in their bodies. It was in these circumstances, and faced with the prospect of his own imminent death, that Baha'u'lláh received the first intimation of his mission.
One night in a dream, these exalted words were heard on every side. Verily we shall render thee victorious by thyself and by thy pen. Grieve thou not for that which hath befallen thee, neither be thou afraid, for thou art in safety. Ere long will God raise up the treasures of the earth, men who will aid thee through thyself and through thy name, wherewith God hath revived the hearts of such as have recognized him. The experience of divine revelation, touched only at second hand in surviving accounts of the lives of the Buddha, Moses, Jesus Christ, and Muhammad, is described graphically in Baha'u'llah's own words.
During the days I lay in the prison of Tehran, though the galling weight of the chains and the stench-filled air allowed me but little sleep, still in those infrequent moments of slumber, I felt as if something flowed from the crown of my head over my breast, even as a mighty torrent that precipitateth itself upon the earth from the summit of a lofty mountain. Every limb of my body would as a result be set afire. At such moments my tongue reciteth what no man could bear to hear.
His mystical experience in the Siyahchal led to the birth of the Baha'i revelation. In December 1852, after 4 months of confinement, without trial or recourse, Baha'u'lláh was released and immediately banished from his native land. His wealth and properties were confiscated. This expulsion was the beginning of 40 years of exile, imprisonment, and bitter persecution. Baha'u'lláh set out accompanied by his family, including his wife Nawwab, who was 7 months pregnant, and a number of other believers on a 3-month-long journey through a long and bitterly cold winter. They arrived in Baghdad in April 1853 in a state of utter destitution, exhaustion, and starvation.
In the years which immediately followed his departure from Persia, Baha'u'lláh gave priority to the needs of the Babi community which had gathered in Baghdad, a task which had devolved on him as the only effective Babi leader to have survived the massacres. The death of the Bab and the almost simultaneous loss of most of the young faith's teachers and guides had left the believers scattered and demoralized. When his efforts to rally those who had fled to Iraq aroused jealousy and dissension, he followed the path that had been taken by all the messengers of God before him, and withdrew to the wilderness, choosing for this purpose the mountain region of Kurdistan. His withdrawal, as he later said, had contemplated no return. Its reason was to avoid becoming a subject of discord among the faithful, a source of disturbance unto our companions. Although the 2 years spent in the mountains of Soleimaniye in Kurdistan were a period of intense privation and physical hardship, Baha'u'lláh describes them as a time of profound happiness, during which he reflected deeply on the message entrusted to him. Alone we communed with our spirit, oblivious of the world and all that is therein.
Two of the most important volumes of Baha'u'llah's writings date from this first period of exile, preceding the declaration of his mission in 1863. The first of these is a small book which he named The Hidden Words. Written in the form of a compilation, the volume represents the ethical heart of Baha'u'llah's message. In verses which Baha'u'lláh describes as a distillation of the spiritual guidance of all the revelations of the past, the voice of God speaks directly to the human soul. The second of the two major works composed by Baha'u'lláh during this period is the Book of Certitude, a comprehensive exposition of the nature and purpose of religion. In passages that draw not only on the Quran, but with equal facility and insight on the Old and New Testaments, the messengers of God are depicted as agents of a single, unbroken process, the awakening of the human race to its spiritual and moral potentialities.
The Iranian council in Baghdad, alarmed at Baha'u'llah's growing fame, encouraged his further banishment. After a 10-year stay in Baghdad, Baha'u'lláh was informed that the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire had ordered his transfer to Constantinople. To prepare for the trip, Baha'u'lláh moved out of the city to the garden of Najib Pasha, known as Rezvan, for 12 days while the caravan was being prepared for the long journey. It was on the first day, April 21, 1863, 19 years after the Bab's declaration, that Baha'u'lláh announced that he was indeed the one whose coming had been foretold by the Bab, the promised one of all prophets.
The purpose underlying all creation is the revelation of this most sublime, this most holy day, the day known as the Day of God. In his books and scriptures, the day which all the prophets and the chosen ones and the holy ones wished to witness. This is the day in which mankind can behold the face and hear the voice of the Promised One. To Israel he was neither more nor less than the incarnation of the everlasting Father, the Lord of hosts, come down with 10,000s of saints. To Christendom, Christ returned in the glory of the Father. To Shia Islam, the return of the Imam Hussein. To Sunni Islam, the descent of the Spirit of God. To the Zoroastrians, the promised Shah Bahram. To the Hindus, the reincarnation of Krishna. To the Buddhists, the fifth Buddha.
His 12-day stay at the Garden of Rezvan is commemorated annually throughout the Baha'i world as the most significant Baha'i festival. When Baha'u'lláh had been in Constantinople for only 4 months, the Persian and the Ottoman rulers cooperated to secure yet another exile. He was exiled to Adrianople. Although the journey lasted but a few days, it was by far the most terrible they had undertaken. Snow fell heavily most of the time. They remained in Adrianople for 5 years. It was there that Baha'u'lláh publicly announced his mission and was enthusiastically accepted by the majority of the Babis, who were known thereafter as Baha'is.
He formally proclaimed his mission to the kings and rulers of the world and its religious leaders. Among them were Napoleon III, the Tsar of Russia, William I of Perugia, Queen Victoria, Pope Pius IX, the Sultan of Turkey, and the Shah of Persia. In his letter to Nasir-ed-Din Shah, the King of Persia, he wrote, "O King, I was but a man like others, asleep upon my couch, when lo, the breezes of the All-Glorious were wafted over me, and taught me the knowledge of all that hath been. This thing is not from me, but from one who is almighty and all-knowing. And he bade me lift up my voice between earth and heaven. And for this there befell me what hath caused the tears of every man of understanding to flow. This is but a leaf which the winds of the will of thy Lord, the Almighty, the All-Praised, have stirred. His all-compelling summons hath reached me and caused me to speak his praise amidst all people. I was indeed as one dead when his behest was uttered. The hand of the will of thy Lord, the compassionate, the merciful, transformed me."
The Baha'is in Persia and Iraq were bitterly prosecuted and many were killed, but the movement continued to spread. The Turkish authorities in Adrianople treated Baha'u'lláh with great respect. This did not please the Persian council in the city, so the government abruptly decided to subject its guests to strict confinement. Without warning, his house was surrounded by soldiers, and the exiles were ordered to prepare for their final banishment to the grim fortress town of Akka. Notorious throughout the empire for the foulness of its climate and the prevalence of many diseases, Akka was a penal colony used by the Ottoman Empire for the incarceration of dangerous criminals who could not be expected to survive their imprisonment.
Baha'u'lláh himself was confined in a mud-floor cell that was open to wind and rain. During the first few days, the children were crying continually and sleep was almost impossible. Malaria, dysentery, and other diseases soon broke out. 3 died to their sickness, and Baha'u'lláh had to give his own carpet to be sold for the expenses of their burial. But instead, the soldiers took the money and thrust the bodies into a hole in the ground. During the imprisonment in the barracks, visitors were excluded even though they traveled all the way from Persia on foot to see their beloved. Gradually, however, the changes that had taken place in Baghdad and Adrianople started to occur in Akka. The prison governor began to recognize Baha'u'llah's innocence and his exceptional qualities, and wished to render some services for him. So after 2 years of being in the cell, Baha'u'lláh moved to the house of Abud, where he revealed the Kitab-e-Aqdas, the most holy book.
Baha'u'llah's writings include a host of metaphors that express the paradox of God's revelation. I am the royal falcon on the arm of the Almighty. I unfold the drooping wings of every broken bird and start it on its flight. The rest of the party was accommodated in a caravanserai in the town. Baha'u'lláh was confined for 7 years in the house of Abud. In a small room, 13 members of his household had to accommodate themselves. They suffered greatly for the lack of ordinary conveniences of life. But their confidence was never shaken. While in the barracks of Akka, Baha'u'lláh wrote, "Fear not, these doors shall be opened, my tent shall be pitched on Mount Carmel, and the utmost joy shall be realized." These great sources of consolation to his followers were literally fulfilled.
In June 1877, Baha'u'lláh at last emerged from the strict confinement of the prison city of Akka and moved with his family to Mazra'eh, a small estate a few miles north of the city. Baha'u'lláh loved the beauty and nature of the country. One day he passed the remark, "I have not gazed on verdure for 9 years. The country is the world of the soul, the cities is the world of bodies." For 2 years he remained in that charming and lovely spot. Then it was decided to remove to another place at Bahji, which was rented by his son Abdul Baha. They all bore witness that Baha'u'lláh was in reality no prisoner, but a king of kings. He lived at Bahji like a prince. Often he would say, "Verily, verily, the most wretched prison has been converted into a paradise of Eden."
Having in his earlier years of hardship shown how to glorify God in a state of poverty, Baha'u'lláh in his later years at Bahji showed how to glorify God in a state of honor and affluence. The offering of hundreds of thousands of devoted followers placed at his disposal large funds which he was called upon to administer. Although his life at Bahji had been described as truly regal in the highest sense of the word, it must not be imagined that it was characterized by material splendor or extravagance. Baha'u'lláh and his family lived very simply, and luxury was unknown to that household. Near his home, the believers prepared a beautiful garden Baha'u'lláh named Rezvan, in which he often spent many consecutive days or even weeks, spending the nights in a little cottage. He made several visits to Akka and Haifa, and on more than one occasion pitched his tent on Mount Carmel, as he had predicted when imprisoned in the barracks of Akka. Baha'u'lláh spent most of his time in prayer and meditation, in writing the sacred books, in revealing tablets, and in spiritual education of the friends. In order to give him entire freedom for his great work, Abdul Baha undertook the arrangement, of all other affairs, even the meeting of the mullahs, poets, and members of the government. All were delighted through meeting Abdu'l-Baha and entirely satisfied with his explanation and talks, and although they had not met Baha'u'lláh himself, they became full of friendly feelings towards him, for Abdu'l-Baha's attitude caused them to understand the station of his father.
The remaining 12 years of Baha'u'llah's life were devoted to addressing spiritual and social issues through his writings, and to receiving a stream of Baha'i pilgrims who made their way with great difficulty from Persia and other lands. Among the visitors, Professor Edward Brown, a distinguished Orientalist from Cambridge who spent 5 days at Bahji, recalls, "A mild, dignified voice bade me be seated and then continued, 'Praise be to God that thou hast attained. Thou hast come to see a prisoner and an exile. We desire but the good of the world and the happiness of the nations. Yet they deem us a stirrer up of strife and sedition, worthy of bondage and banishment. That all nations should become one in faith and all men as brothers. That the bonds of affection and unity between the sons of men should be strengthened. That diversity of religion should cease and differences of race be annulled. What harm is there in this? Yet so it shall be. These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come. Do not you in Europe need this also? Is not this that which Christ foretold? Yet do we see your kings and rulers lavishing their treasures more freely on means for the destruction of the human race than on that which would conduce to the happiness of mankind. These strifes and this bloodshed and discord must cease, and all men be as one kindred and one family."
Baha'u'lláh visited Haifa 4 times. He pointed out to Abdu'l-Baha a piece of land on Mount Carmel where the remains of the Bab should be buried. On the 29th of May 1892, Baha'u'llah's earthly life ended in his 75th year. The bells of Akka, which 24 years earlier had warned the people of the coming of the exile, told out his passing. A telegram was sent to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, which read, "The sun of Baha'u'lláh has set." Among the last tablets he revealed was his will and testament, which he wrote with his own hand. By this will, Abdu'l-Baha was constituted his father's representative and the expounder of his teachings. By this arrangement, sectarianism and division were abolished, and the unity of the Baha'i faith was assured.
The Baha'i faith established itself first across America and Europe, and then throughout the world. The Baha'i faith and its community of believers were to pass successfully through the critical first century of their existence, with their unity firmly intact. Baha'u'llah's goal that the human race, in all its diversity, can learn to live and work as one people in a common global homeland was fulfilled. He says, "Let not man glory in this, that he loves his country, but let him rather glory in this, that he loves his kind."
What we may well inquire is the nature and implication of the Bahá'í revelation, which manifesting itself so soon after the declaration of the Bab, abolished at one stroke the dispensation which the Babi faith had so newly proclaimed. What we may well pause to consider were the claims of Bahá'u'lláh, who, himself a disciple of the Bab, had regarded himself as being in the position to abrogate the law identified with his beloved master.
He who in such dramatic circumstances was made to sustain the overpowering weight of so glorious a mission was none other than the one whom posterity will acclaim, and whom innumerable followers already recognize as the judge, the lawgiver, and redeemer of all mankind, as the organizer of the entire planet, as the unifier of the children of men, as the inaugurator of the long-awaited millennium, as the originator of a new universal cycle, as the establisher of the most great peace, as the fountain of the most great justice, as the proclaimer of the coming of age of the entire human race, as the creator of a new world order, and as the inspirer and founder of a world civilization.
O contending peoples and kindreds of the earth, set your faces towards unity, and let the radiance of its light shine upon you. Gather ye together, and for the sake of God resolve to root out whatever is the source of contention amongst you. Then will the effulgence of the world's great luminary envelop the whole earth, and its inhabitants become the citizens of one city, and the occupants of one and the same throne. This wronged one hath, ever since the early days of his life, cherished none other desire but this, and will continue to entertain no wish except this wish. There can be no doubt whatever the peoples of the world, of whatever race or religion, derive their inspiration from one heavenly source, and are the subjects of one God. The difference between the ordinances under which they abide should be attributed to the varying requirements and exigencies of the age in which they were revealed. All of them, except a few which are the outcome of human perversity, were ordained of God, and are a reflection of His will and purpose. Arise, and armed with the power of faith, shatter to pieces the gods of your vain imaginings, the sowers of dissension amongst you.